Hello and welcome to Top Story. Today, the case of the 6 French aid workers sentenced in Chad last December and pardoned on Monday by President Idriss Déby. The 6, who worked for the French agency Zoe Ark, were originally sentenced to 8 years hard labour for seeking to abduct 103 African children to France. They've been serving their sentences in France under a cooperation agreement between the two countries. They claimed during their trial that they had thought they were rescuing orphans from Darfur. The aim, they said, had been to find them foster homes in Europe. It emerged, though, that most of the children were not orphans at all and came from Chad's border area with Sudan. The pardons come against a background of improving relations between Chad and France, which provided critical logistical support to President Déby when rebels attacked the Chadian capital in February. Well, joining me to discuss the decision by President Déby is George Kazolias, who's a professor at the American University of Paris and a specialist on Africa. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. What do you think prompted Idriss Déby at this juncture to issue this pardon to the 6?
Well, I think that was probably organized when President Sarkozy went to Chad last October. And of course, when France did more than a little to save Idriss Déby from being ousted in February when the rebels attacked N'Djamena. One good turn deserves another. I think the whole thing is sort of a farce from the beginning. You know, everybody's guilty here, and President Sarkozy would like to put this behind him. And Idriss Déby is very happy to have the support of France, who has 1,100 troops in Chad. On the border area. So
well, it's interesting that the Élysée Palace has just put out a statement saying that the pardons came within the general line, was the phrase I think that was used, of the talks between President Sarkozy and President Déby, which does suggest there was, without wishing to actually specify, that those talks were fairly instrumental in securing the pardons.
Well, we can only speculate on what was said between the two men, but, you know, all signs seem to indicate that, you know, the scenario was drawn up from the beginning. Okay, you charge them, you try them, we take them, you pardon them, and the rebel attack came in the middle, and so that, you know, and then the French helped save Déby in February. But you know, everything seems to indicate the whole thing was organized from the beginning.
There seems to be a feeling in France, at least, that the actions of the 6 were misguided rather than criminal. Is that how you would read it?
No, everybody's guilty in this affair. The French knew from May last year that Zoe Ark were going to do this. They were advertising on the internet for French people to donate a few thousand euros to get a black kid. So basically buying black kids to raise and give themselves a good conscience. The French army ran the air base where the plane landed and where the plane was going to take off from. So they knew what was going on. The Chadians knew what was going on. They got spies everywhere and waited to the last minute to arrest them. And Zoe Ark are just amateurs, arrogant and ignorant. Arrogance and ignorance go hand in hand, and unfortunately, this is very often the case with NGOs, and it makes life very difficult for the few good NGOs who are trying to do work.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. What does this tell us about the way NGOs operate and should operate in situations like this?
Well, it's obvious you cannot ride into somebody else's country roughshod like that and just do as you wish. You know, you have to respect the sovereignty, the culture, and the laws of the country you're in. You have to work with the authorities and through the authorities. You also have to know what you're doing. I mean, you know, you just can't declare yourself. I mean, I can't declare myself an astrophysician tomorrow and be an astrophysician. It's the same thing with NGOs. You know, there's training involved. There's a lot of study that's involved. But the other problem.
So, do the ground rules need tightening up? Do you think for operations like this?
I think there has to be greater control over NGOs, and maybe there has to be some sort of international organization that gives some sort of convention to NGOs and. You know, you need some sort of authorization before you go in, because I've seen a lot of do-gooders in Africa doing bad things, thinking they're doing good things.
But there are a lot of do-gooders who do good things as well, who suffer as a consequence of this sort of thing.
They do suffer as a consequence of this sort of thing. There's another problem as well with NGOs, is that NGOs need money to function, and that means they need publicity. So they always go there where the press is, and there are a lot of places where they're needed where they aren't. And a lot of times, even the good NGOs, they spend more time trying to raise money than doing work, and raising money a lot of times means spending money. And so I think the whole question of NGOs has to be re-examined. re-examined and re-looked at. But let's just say one thing. The solution to Africa's problems is not stealing their children and bringing them to Europe. Africa must and will eventually solve its problems. We can help, but we can't do it in their place, and we definitely can't be taking their children. And I want to add one other thing. The parents are also guilty in this.
Well, I was going to say,
how
culpable are the parents? How innocent are the parents?
The parents knew exactly what they were doing. Here they get a chance, to get one of their children free to Europe, education, grow up, maybe get a job and send money back to the family. It seems obvious to me. We're dealing with polygamous families who are having a hard time caring for their children in a war zone, in an economic crisis, where there's not enough food. So somebody comes in and says, "We'll take one of your kids to Europe, to a foster family," and say, "Well, okay, take a couple." I think, and now they have, as far as I'm concerned, they have the gall to be demanding compensation for what happened.
6 million euros.
Yeah, this is absolutely ridiculous.
That's not part of the pardon.
No. That's still on the table. So everybody here, from the French government to Zoe Ark, to the Chadian government, to the French army, to the parents of these children, are all responsible. And that's another reason why the whole thing had to be put behind, because it would eventually come out that everybody was somehow involved.
This whole thing has got a very negative press in Africa. How much damage has been done to the general operations of NGOs in Africa by this, do you think?
Well, Africans are very sensitive to the respect, and they're quite right, to the respect of their national sovereignty. Imagine here in France if some rich Africans came and bought a bunch of French kids to take back and raise so they have a good conscience. How would the French feel about it, without going through the French government, without respecting French law, without even going through talking to the French authorities? I mean, you just can't go into somebody's country and ignore their sovereignty. And Africans are very sensitive to this. They want to be respected, they deserve to be respected, and they're absolutely right to demand to be respected.
But there are real problems that are being dealt with here, and that's why the NGOs are there in the first place.
Look, you cannot ignore the sovereignty of a country, even if you don't like its government, okay? Once again, Africans are going to have to solve African problems themselves.
And there, I'm afraid, we're going to have to wrap up. We've run out of time.
Much.
Thanks to our guest today, George Kazolias. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.
Okay.
The program dedicated to international news was brought to you by Le Monde.